On the night the world finally decided Sarah Vaughan was divine, she could barely catch her breath between songs. In the ballroom lights, she was all glitter and grace, a legend being handed plaques and praise, words like lifetime and master rolling off polished tongues as if time itself had surrendered. Cameras flashed, tuxedos shifted, and somewhere in the middle of the speeches a phrase landed like a verdict, the greatest voice of the century. The divine one, officially stamped into history. But inside her chest the truth was less glamorous. Every inhale felt a fraction shorter than the one before. Years of smoke, miles of road, and nights outrunning exhaustion had been quietly adding up. The same lungs that could suspend a note longer than most people could hold. A thought were beginning to falter. Applause rose around her like a golden cage. She smiled, thanked everyone, made the jokes she knew they wanted. Then when the microphone was lowered and the lights softened, she leaned on the nearest solid surface for just a second longer than anyone was supposed to notice. In public, she was being told she would live forever. In private, her body was already negotiating the terms. That was always the paradox with Sarah Vaughan. The higher the world lifted her voice, the more invisible the woman carrying it became. You could put Jazz Master and Lifetime Achievement on a certificate, but you couldn't see the bank accounts men had emptied in her name. The model airplanes lined up in quiet houses because real flights were lonely. The nights when she stared at hotel ceilings wondering why success still felt so much like solitary confinement. The band struck up a tune for her to join, another standard she had sung until it was stitched into her DNA. She walked toward the microphone, every step practiced, every gesture polished by decades of repetition. A pianist touched a familiar chord. She opened her mouth. The room fell away. The note that came out was an E-flat, dark and perfectly centered, hanging in the air like a small, private miracle. For a heartbeat, no one in that ballroom knew anything about diagnoses or debt, about failed marriages or bad contracts. They only knew that this sound existed, and that it seemed to come from a place beyond the ordinary map of the human throat. She breathes. The note holds. "When I sing, I'm free," she once said. "When I stop, the world crowds close again." It's a beautiful line until you realize how literally she meant it. Freedom, for Sarah Vaughan, was measured in bars and breaths. The moment the last vibration left her body, everything she'd been holding back, the fear, the fatigue, the weight of being called divine by people who would never pay her medical bills, rushed in like smoke under a door. So how did a quiet girl from Newark end up here, standing at the shimmering edge between immortality and a failing body? How did a voice that seemed untouchable grow inside a life that was anything but? To answer that, we have to strip away the trophies and the headlines and go back to the rooms where the air was thick with smoke and hope, where an unknown teenager stepped into a harsh spotlight in Harlem, and to an even earlier room in Newark where a piano waited in the shadows, and a young girl discovered that sound was the only way she knew how to breathe. Newark, New Jersey, 1930s, before the war, before bebop, before anyone had called her sassy or divine. The Vaughan family's house is small but full of sound. Her father, Asbury, is a carpenter by trade and a guitarist by affection, fingers picking through hymns and blues in stolen minutes after work. Her mother, Ada, is a laundress, folding strangers' clothes by day and directing the choir at the Mount Zion Baptist Church on Sundays. The neighborhood is black, working class, pressed in by both poverty and the invisible walls of a segregated America. But inside that house, music opens windows where there are none. Sarah Lois Vaughan is a quiet child, but not shy. She is observant, watchful, with eyes that seem older than they should be. She sits at the kitchen table doing homework while her mother hums spirituals, while the radio crackles with big band broadcasts from Harlem and Chicago. Late at night, she presses her ear close to the speaker so she can catch every note. She hears Ella Fitzgerald before Ella is Ella, Here's Billie Holiday bending phrases around a bar line like she's bending fate itself. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought forms. I want to do that. But thoughts like that feel dangerous when your world is a boarding house and a bus line, not a record contract. At church, the piano becomes her first confidant. She is allowed to practice after choir rehearsals, small fingers stretching toward chords borrowed from the radio. The sanctuary is empty except for the echo of her own playing. Church windows catch the late afternoon light and throw it in colored strips across the worn wooden pews. It feels like she is sitting inside a stained glass throat. One Wednesday evening, Ada hears her daughter move from a simple hymn into something else. Tones that don't belong to the hymnal, chromatic little curls of melody. Bebop hasn't been named yet, but something like its skeleton is in that sound. Girl, what are you doing? Ada asks, half amused, half alarmed. Just hearing what it can do, Sarah says. She sings in the choir, of course. That's where everyone in the neighborhood first hears what her vocal cords are capable of. Her voice, even as a teenager, sits low in the chest, deeper than most girls her age, with a richness that makes the altos around her sound pale. When she takes a solo on Precious Lord, the congregation shifts in their seats. Some close their eyes. One old woman fans herself and whispers, Lord, that child got something on her. The something is hard to describe. It's not just pitch, although the pitch is flawless, even when she slides between notes as if the rules of Western harmony are suggestions rather than laws. It's not just power, although she can raise the roof when she wants to. It's the sense that she is conversing with the melody, questioning it, turning it over, looking at it from new angles, even as a teenager. She is not content to just deliver a song. She wants to interrogate it. School is an obligation rather than a passion. Her real education happens in the movie theaters, where she sits in the dark watching Hollywood's glossy white fantasies while the scores swirl around her. And in the jazz clubs of Newark and New York, where she sneaks in with forged age or someone else's ID, the room thick with smoke and possibility. She gravitates toward the musicians, not the chatter at the bar. When she hears a horn player take a solo, she hums along under her breath, mirroring the phrasing, imagining what it would sound like if a human voice did that. By the early 1940s, she is working days, switchboard, odd jobs, whatever pays, and singing nights whenever anyone will let her near a microphone. There is a rumor that makes its way up and down Newark's black neighborhoods. There's a skinny church girl with a piano who can sing like nobody's business. Rumors are one thing, stages are another. In 1942, the Apollo Theater in Harlem announces another amateur night. It is a ritual in Black America by then, the stage where careers are born and destroyed, where booing from the balcony is as much a part of the show as any act. Sarah is 18, restless, tired of imagining a life she hasn't stepped into. Her friends dare her. Her parents hesitate, but they know there's no holding her. They put her on the bus with a borrowed dress, a head full of prayers, and the kind of fear that feels suspiciously like hope. The Apollo is a different planet. Backstage, the smell of hair pomade, sweat, and cheap perfume mixes with nerves. Sarah peers through the curtain and sees the crowd, hundreds of faces stacked in darkness, waiting, judging. The amateur ahead of her is a dancer, jittery and over-rehearsed. He lasts 30 seconds before the infamous Sandman taps him off stage with a cane. The crowd roars with laughter. Sarah's stomach drops. When they call her name, she walks out into the light. It is hotter than she imagined. The microphone stands there like a witness. The bandleader leans in and asks, "What you doing, little lady?" She says body and soul. He raises his eyebrows. Big song for a girl who looks like a choir member but nods to the band. The first notes come quietly, almost shy, and some in the audience shift, half expecting another sacrificial lamb. Then she gets to the bridge. Something changes. She loosens the rhythm, stretches the phrase, I'm all for you, body and soul, until time itself seems to pause, then snaps it back into place with a perfect landing on the tonic. The drummer grins. The pianist looks over his shoulder. The audience goes quiet in that particular way that means they have decided to listen. She wins. Of course she wins. The prize is money she needs and a chance to come back and open for a bigger name. There is a moment when she stands in the wings after the show, clutching the small envelope of cash, when she feels something like destiny tapping her on the shoulder. Backstage, someone asks how it feels. She shrugs, half shy, half stunned by what just happened. I don't sing because I'm happy, she says quietly. I'm happy because I sing. The band boys laugh, but she means every word. Singing isn't decoration, it's ventilation. It's how she gets air into places that would otherwise choke her. Then the house lights come up. The theater empties. She takes the bus back to her rented room in Newark. Narrow bed, thin walls, the radiator ticking like it's counting down to something. She sits on the edge of the mattress, holding the cash and staring at the window where the city's dull orange glow seeps through the curtains. The question slips out of her mouth before she even realizes she's saying it. Who's going to stay when the lights go out? The next morning, she goes back to work. The world does not rearrange itself to accommodate one night of applause, but something has shifted inside her. She has touched a stage that did not swallow her. She has tested her voice in front of strangers and watched them change in front of her. And she has tasted for the first time the intoxicating illusion that when she sings, she is untouchable. I sang to feel less alone, she will say years later. I kept singing because it was the only thing I had. Opportunity comes in the form of a band leader who knows another band leader who has heard about a girl from Newark who knocked them dead at the Apollo. One recommendation leads to another, and soon she is auditioning for Earl Hines, whose orchestra is a finishing school for geniuses. The year is 1943. The war churns on overseas. On this side of the ocean, in dim clubs and bright ballrooms, a new language called bebop is being born in the spaces between the notes. The audition is supposed to be simple. Sing a tune or two, let the pianist feel out your keys, see if you can blend with the band. But when Sarah steps up, the room tilts. Hines hears something he can't categorize. This isn't just a girl singer to drape in front of the band for window dressing. This is an instrument as complex and unpredictable as any horn. He hires her. On the road with Earl Hines, she is thrown into the deep end of a pool populated by sharks and saints. Dizzy Gillespie is there, a trumpet like a pressure valve releasing the future. Charlie Parker drops in, alto sax lines knotting and unknotting themselves in midair. The bus rides between gigs are long, the hotels segregated, if they allow them at all, and the money is thin. Food is bought in back doors, insults are delivered at front desks. Jim Crow's hand is heavy, even when the band is playing for soldiers who are technically fighting for freedom. On stage, though, the rules change. Sarah listens obsessively. She studies how Dizzy stacks notes, how Bird splinters a melody and reassembles it into something new. At first, she sings the tune straight, girl singer, sweetening the band's attack. But little by little, she starts echoing the horns, sliding into their phrases, tackling lines that were designed to be played on brass, not sung by a human throat. Musicians in the back row nudge each other. Did you hear that? She just sang a bebop lick, with words. Technique is nothing without feeling, she reminds herself, even as her technical arsenal grows terrifying. She is building something no one quite recognizes yet, a voice that can improvise like an instrument while still carrying the emotional freight of a lyric. When Dizzy and Bird leave to form Billy Eckstine's band, she eventually follows, stepping into a musical laboratory where the experiments are loud, fast, and relentless. Night after night, in cities that blur together, she stands in front of a band that sounds like the future crashing into the present. Her name climbs in downbeat polls. Critics rave about a voice with 4 octaves of velvet. Club owners rave about ticket sales. Record men circle. On paper, it looks like a straight-line story. Girl leaves Newark, wins Apollo, joins big band, graduates to solo stardom. But inside that arc are countless hotel rooms where she lies awake wondering if she is just another product in a system run by men who hold all the contracts and all the keys. She is learning early that genius is one thing, ownership is another. In 1946, she records Lover Man for Musicraft. The record becomes a hit, and with it, Sarah Vaughan, the solo artist, officially arrives. Club dates pile up. So do offers from bigger labels. She signs with Columbia, then Mercury, straddling the line between pop ballads and jazz experiments in a way that confuses purists and delights accountants. The 1950s wrap her voice in strings and reverb, in tuxedoed orchestras and polite applause. On the surface, it is the era of glamour. She appears in gowns that glitter under stage lights, hair coiffed, smile luminous. Photographers catch her in perfect profile, and magazines print the images under headlines that call her the Divine One, sassy, the girl with the heavenly voice. Her name is on marquees in New York, Chicago, Paris. She becomes for many the sound of sophisticated urban nights, yet even in her most polished pop arrangements, the jazz noir remains. Listen to Misty, to Lullaby of Birdland, to Tenderly. Listen to the way she plays with rhythm, how she delays a word until the last possible moment, and then drops it with surgical precision. Listen to the infamous riff she builds in the middle of Lullaby of Birdland, scatting lines so intricate they sound like they were borrowed from a saxophone solo and translated into syllables. Listen to the slide down she executes at the end of a phrase, the note melting down the scale like a candle giving up its shape. That's the paradox of her fame. The more divine her voice sounds, the more invisible her human troubles become. Off stage, she is not icy or remote. Friends describe her as funny, earthy, a woman who loves to cook huge meals and feed bandmates until they can't move. She collects perfumes the way some people collect stamps, crystal bottles lined up on dressing tables around the world, each scent a memory of a gig, a man, a city. She has a surprising passion for model airplanes, carefully assembling miniature versions of the machines that carry her from tour to tour, as if trying to domesticate the very thing that keeps her life in motion and never at rest. She falls in love, hard. Her marriage to trumpeter George Treadwell seems at first like a partnership that makes sense. He becomes her manager, shepherding her career, negotiating fees, handling band payroll. She can focus on the music while he takes care of the rest. For a time, it works. The tours get bigger, the arrangements more lavish, the wardrobe more expensive. The Divine One becomes an industry. The shadow falls slowly. Contracts she doesn't fully read. Signatures on documents handed to her between shows. Money diverted to this investment, that property, that new car. She trusts him. Isn't that what a marriage is meant to be? Trust. Years later, when the marriage cracks under the weight of infidelity and control, she will discover the financial hole she has been pushed into. Taxes unpaid, savings evaporated. Musicians underpaid and furious. She is forced to start over financially while still being introduced on stage as if she were royalty. "I never tried to be divine," she says when a reporter gushes about her nickname. She laughs, but there's an edge. "I just tried to survive." The pattern repeats. Another marriage, another man with his fingers in her bank account, another set of bills that don't add up when the tour is over. Even as white critics describe her as imperious, difficult, a diva, she is being picked clean by men who understand that the world will blame her for being bad with money, rather than question the system that lets everyone else eat off her plate. Her biopic, if it were dishonest, would smooth this into a neat lesson. Talented woman, poor choices, tragic consequences. Real life is messier. Love is not a ledger. She stays with men who hurt her because they also make her laugh, or because they promise stability, or because being alone in hotel rooms scares her more than any contract. The line between affection and exploitation blurs when your office is a bar at 2 a.m. and your co-workers are musicians who don't know how to live at half volume. Depression drifts in like cigarette smoke. Slow, pervasive, hard to dispel. There are years when she keeps moving simply because the calendar is already full. There are nights when she sings ballads about heartbreak and thinks, this is too on the nose. There are mornings when the only thing that gets her out of bed is the knowledge that once she is on stage, the pressure in her chest will briefly lift. When I sing, I'm free, she repeats. When I stop, life crowds back in. Is that freedom or addiction? Was her voice her escape, or the golden cage that kept her flying in prescribed circles, always returning to the same perch? In the 1970s, jazz is no longer the center of the popular universe. Rock and soul dominate the charts. Some of her peers fade, some reinvent themselves. Sarah does something subtler. She leans back into the jazz that birthed her. Bebop phrasing, daring harmonies, unapologetic complexity. She signs with smaller labels that give her more artistic control, if not bigger checks. She tours Europe and Japan, where audiences treat her like a national treasure even as her home country files her under legend and moves on. Sometimes, after a concert in Paris or Tokyo, young singers line up backstage clutching programs and vinyl, eyes wide, voices shaking. They tell her she sounds like something not quite earthly. She rolls her eyes, grins, deflects with a joke. You can't help it if you were born with the voice of a nightingale, she tells one interviewer, half mocking the myth the world insists on building around her. It's funny on camera. Alone in the hotel room later, the line feels heavier. What if the nightingale wants a night off? Live recordings from Montreux and Tokyo capture a different divine one. Older, yes. Heavier. Her face carries the traces of disappointments that no makeup can fully erase. But her voice? If anything, it has grown deeper, wider, richer. The upper register is still there when she wants it, but she now revels in the basement tones, those impossibly low notes that vibrate like a bass clarinet. She uses space differently too. More silence, more risk. A younger singer might rush to fill every bar. Sarah hangs notes in midair, daring them to fall. On stage, she jokes with audiences, teases her musicians, pulls faces when she nails a particularly fiendish run. Rolls her eyes at herself when she goes just a bit too far. The icy diva image melts into something warmer, stranger, more human. At home, she cooks elaborate meals. She spoils her adopted daughter, Paris, trying in her own way to build a family structure that doesn't depend on band schedules or managers' calendars. Friends drop by for dinner and leave at dawn, full of food and stories. Her perfume bottles multiply. She still builds model airplanes, lining them up on shelves like little metallic prayers for safe travel. The money is better managed now, but the scars of being burned never fully fade. She keeps a closer eye on contracts, asks more questions, but there is always a voice in the back of her head whispering, remember how quickly it can vanish. Her body, meanwhile, sends warning signs she does not want to read. The cigarettes that have been part of her image since the 1940s, sultry interviews, smoke curling around a microphone, have done their damage. She coughs more. She gets winded more easily. Notes that used to feel effortless now require conscious support. She keeps touring anyway. How could she not? The stage is where she knows who she is. Off stage, she is a black woman in America navigating banks, doctors, and an industry that still assumes male authority. On stage, she is the architect of her own universe, The industry, late as always, finally starts to catch up to what musicians have known for decades. Awards arrive like delayed mail. There's an Emmy for a PBS Gershwin special, Grammys for performances that sound as effortless as breathing. And then, in 1989, as if someone at the top of the ledger finally underlined her name, she is named an NEA Jazz Master and given a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. The phrases sound grand: lifetime, master. But to Sarah, they are just official stamps on a job she has already been doing every night, staying alive by singing. In 1989, during a particularly grueling run of shows, she pushes herself past exhaustion. The cough is worse. The tightness in her chest is harder to ignore. Finally, the tests she has been postponing become unavoidable. The diagnosis, lung cancer, arrives like a verdict she secretly expected. Friends urge her to rest, to stop, to focus on treatment. Part of her wants to. Another part looks at the calendar, at the commitments, at the audiences waiting in cities she has already imagined. She schedules treatments around performances, cancels as little as possible. It is as if she is trying to outrun the disease the same way she once outran poverty and disappointment. With work, with notes, with nights in front of strangers who know nothing of her medical charts. "When I die, I hope it's after a show," she said half a lifetime ago. The line echoes now with a darker resonance. Does she still mean it? Or is she saying it because she doesn't know how to picture an ending that isn't wrapped in applause? Cancer is not impressed by encores, it advances. By early 1990, she retreats from the road at last, returning to her home in California. The house is quiet, full of objects that tell the story her body no longer has the energy to narrate. Gold records, framed photographs with Dizzy and Bird and Ella. Newspaper clippings yellowed at the edges, a line of model airplanes looking as if they might taxi right off the shelf. One of them has a cracked wing, glued once and never properly fixed. It sits there, slightly lopsided, as if it tried to take off and thought better of it. Perfume bottles catch the sun through the windows, scattering tiny rainbows across the floor. The air smells faintly of coffee, medicine, and whatever is left after a lifetime of smoke. She spends her final weeks surrounded by family and a few close friends. The circle small and fiercely protective. There are days when the pain is sharp and the air feels thick. There are other days when she leans back, eyes half closed, and listens to her own records playing softly in the background. What does it feel like to hear your younger self forever pristine while your present body falters? Is it comforting or cruel? Does she hear flaws no one else hears, or does she at last allow herself a moment of admiration for the instrument she disciplined and pushed and doubted for so long? On April 3rd, 1990, Sarah Vaughan dies at home, 66 years old. The official cause, lung cancer. Unofficially, she is one more artist whose body could not outlast the demands placed on her by an industry, a culture, and her own relentless standards. News spreads quickly. Newspapers that once critiqued her wardrobe now print obituaries calling her one of the greatest voices of the 20th century. Radio stations play Misty and Lullaby of Birdland on loop. Jazz DJs huskily intone that a light has gone out. Younger singers who have worn out records trying to copy that vibrato, that pitch, that frightening control, sit in their apartments and cry quietly. At her funeral, the tributes blur into each other. Genius, trailblazer, diva, queen. Musicians talk about how she changed their concept of what a human voice could do. Scholars talk about her role in integrating American stages, about a black woman commanding spaces that didn't want to admit how much they needed her. Fans talk about the first time they heard that voice spilling out of a cheap speaker and feeling for a few seconds less alone. Yet, even in mourning, the contradictions persist. Some recall her warmth, her jokes, the way she nicknamed people and treated them like family. Others whisper anonymously that she could be difficult, demanding, hard to work with. But what does difficult mean when it is applied to a woman who learned the hard way that being easygoing was an invitation to be robbed? How many men with half her talent and twice her temper are called visionary instead? In the decades that follow, her legacy stretches in every direction. In music schools, students analyze her phrasing like scripture. They transcribe the misty nudge on the word look, the dizzying scat break in Lullaby of Birdland, the way she can lean on a single syllable of tenderly until it feels like the center of the universe. They measure her range, nearly 4 octaves from the basement growl to the soprano shimmer, and wonder how one throat contained so much geography. In competitions and festivals bearing her name, young singers from Brazil, Japan, Italy, the States step up to microphones and attempt the impossible, to channel a fraction of what she did without falling into mere imitation. Many of them cite her as the reason they sing at all. A few modern pop stars, Ariana Grande, Samara Joy, Lala Hathaway, mention her in interviews, calling her a vocal universe, the blueprint, the one you can't outrun. In cultural history, she becomes a symbol of something more complicated than simple success. She is not the tragic martyr of Billie Holiday, whose story is entangled with state violence and racism that literally arrested her on stage. She is not the Cinderella arc of Ella Fitzgerald, whose journey from homeless teen to beloved First Lady of Song fits neatly into an American dream narrative. Sarah Vaughan's story lives in the spaces between. The luxurious tragedy of a woman whose voice sat on a throne while her heart paced the servants' quarters. Did her genius protect her? Or did it make her more vulnerable? To exploitation, to isolation, to the pressure of being constantly told she was not quite human? When critics called her a voice not belonging to this species, were they praising her? Or erasing the very woman who had to sit down and write checks after the gig? Her recordings don't answer the question. They simply continue to exist, indifferent to biography, perfect in their imperfections. That nudge of pitch on a live Misty where she dips slightly sharp, then corrects in a microsecond, that human moment becomes a reason people trust her more, not less. Perfection in her hands was never sterile. It was a living thing. Somewhere, a young singer today stands in a practice room, eyes closed, headphones on, trying to match that slide down at the end of a phrase, that velvet descent that defined a genre. They fail, of course. Everyone fails. But in the attempt, they learn something about their own voice, their own despair, their own possibility. In that sense, Sarah is still teaching, still reaching across time, still transforming loneliness into sound. She once said, "I sang to feel less alone. I kept singing because it was the only thing I had." The tragedy and the triumph of her life is that the thing she had, this monstrous, beautiful, impossible voice, belonged in the end to everyone. We claim it on vinyl and streaming platforms, in playlists and documentaries, in the way we say the word Misty and hear a particular chord. But the woman who carried it, who woke up to contracts and court dates and hospital visits, who counted out cash after men spent it, who stared at model airplanes because real ones were always taking her away from home, that woman remains partially hidden behind the myth of divinity. So maybe the question isn't whether she was divine, but what divinity costs when you are born human. Was Sarah Vaughan saved by the voice that made her immortal, or slowly undone by the burden of carrying something the world insisted was otherworldly? Was the spotlight a sanctuary, or a very elegant kind of trap? The record turns. Smoke curls. Somewhere a voice finds its way through the dark and lands exactly on the note the world was missing. She once said, "Technique is nothing without feeling." The line hangs there like a motto carved into the lintel of American music. Maybe that's why generations keep coming back to her, because in her sound they hear permission to feel first and calculate later. She sang so we could breathe. Divinity is a tax no woman should ever have to pay. But if the bill was cruel, the interest is mercy. Every singer who bends a note in search of truth is, in that instant, Sarah Vaughan's heir. And that leaves us with two questions that refuse to resolve, like a chord held just one tension short of home. What do we owe the women whose genius we worship on stage but ignore off it? And as long as her records spin and young singers chase her shadow, does Sarah Vaughan's gift belong more to the woman who paid the price, or to all of us who learned how to feel by listening?